During Thanksgiving dinner, my son-in-law smiled arrogantly at the guests and loudly announced, "This is my father-in-law. He won't be with us much longer. He's sick." I walked in holding the roasted turkey, and my daughter stood up. "Dad, I'm sorry." I smiled and calmly interrupted her. "Perfect, because I have news too." And as soon as I started speaking, pure terror appeared on their faces. Their betrayal will not go unpunished. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My daughter hadn't visited me in 4 months. Not a call on my birthday, not a text on Father's Day, nothing. So when her white Lexus pulled into my driveway on a Tuesday morning, while I was still in my work boots, sanding down a walnut tabletop in my workshop, I knew she didn't come for coffee. My name is Howard Pierce. I'm 64 years old. I live in Austin, Texas, in a one-story house I bought back in 1978 on Ridgeview Lane in Barton Hills. I run a custom woodworking shop, Pierce Custom Woodworks, out of a 600-square-foot building in my backyard. I build tables, chairs, bookshelves, oak, walnut, sometimes cherry if the client has taste. I've been doing this for 40 years, and I've built a reputation in this city that no one handed to me. I heard the car door slam and looked through the window. Laura stepped out. My only daughter, 34 years old. She was wearing that tight smile she puts on when she wants something, but doesn't want you to know she wants it. I've seen that smile on her husband's face 100 times. She learned it from him. Travis Cole, my son-in-law, 37, a real estate agent at Keller Williams who specializes in flipping properties in neighborhoods that are trending up. His words, charming when he needs to be, the kind of man who shakes your hand a little too long and looks you in the eye a little too hard. He married Laura 3 years ago, and since then my daughter started calling less, visiting less, and every conversation somehow circled back to my house, my land, my half-acre in Barton Hills. "Dad, that neighborhood is exploding. You're sitting on a gold mine. Don't you want to help your family?" I wiped the sawdust off my hands and walked to the front door. "Hey, Dad." Laura kissed my cheek. Quick, efficient, like checking a box. "I brought pastries. From that place on South Congress you like. You drove 25 minutes to bring me pastries. Can't I just visit my father?" I let that sit for a moment. Then I put the coffee on. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table I built when Laura was 6, the same one she used to do her homework on, and she talked about nothing for 10 minutes. Work, the weather, a new restaurant Travis found, and then right between a sip of coffee and a bite of croissant, she pulled a folded document from her purse and slid it across the table. "Dad, I need you to look at this. It's nothing serious. Just a precaution." I unfolded it. The header read, "Durable Power of Attorney." Travis Cole's name was listed as the designated agent. I read slowly. I always read slowly. It's a habit that makes people nervous, and I've never minded that. Paragraph 4. There it was. The agent, Travis Cole, would have full authority to manage, sell, or transfer any real property owned by the principal. That's me, the principal, the man whose house they wanted to sell out from under him. I looked up at Laura. "Who sent you to this notary?" She blinked. "What?" "The notary listed on page 3. Henderson and Park. That's a law firm, Laura. Not a notary public at the UPS store. Who told you to go there?" She didn't answer. She picked up her coffee cup, and I watched her fingers tighten around it. "Dad, it's just in case something happens. Travis said. I folded the document and set it down. "I'll think about it. Dad, I said I'll think about it." Laura left 20 minutes later. The pastries stayed on the counter. I didn't touch them. That evening my phone rang. "Travis." I let it ring 3 times before I picked up. "Howard." His voice was warm. Practiced, the way it always is when he wants something. I could hear the television in the background. Some sports channel, the volume turned low. He was comfortable, relaxed, a man who didn't think he had a problem. "Laura told me you had some concerns about the paperwork. Listen, I get it. Legal stuff can feel overwhelming. But we're family, right? This is just about protecting you. Making sure everything's taken care of if, and I'm not saying anything will happen, but if something does, you know?" What exactly do you think is going to happen to me, Travis? A pause. Just half a second, but I caught it. I've spent decades listening to the sound wood makes when you tap it. You can tell if it's solid or hollow. People aren't that different. Nothing, Howard. That's not what I meant. Look, don't make this complicated. We're trying to help. I appreciate your concern, I said, and I hung up. I could have said more. I wanted to. But I've learned that the less you say, the more people tell on themselves. Travis would keep talking. He always does. The question was what he'd do next. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that settles into old walls and stays. I opened the drawer beside the stove, the one where I keep stamps, batteries, and things I don't want to think about, and pulled out a white envelope. It had arrived 8 days earlier. I'd opened it, read it, and put it back without telling a single person. Inside was a letter from my doctor, the results of a biopsy taken 2 weeks prior. I held the envelope in my hands and stared at my daughter's untouched pastries on the counter. They already wanted my house. I wondered what they'd do when they found out about this. I need to go back a little. About 2 weeks before Laura showed up with that power of attorney, I'd been having pain in my lower back, not the usual ache you get from bending over a lathe for 8 hours, something sharper, deeper. My doctor, a young guy, thorough, no bedside manner to speak of, ran some tests and found a mass on my left adrenal gland, 2.3 centimeters. He used the word tumor, which is the kind of word that changes the temperature of a room. But here's what matters. The biopsy came back benign, an adrenal adenoma, common, treatable. My doctor scheduled a routine surgery. He said I'd be back in my workshop within 3 weeks. Mr. Pierce, he told me, this is not a death sentence. It's a speed bump. I believed him. I had no reason not to. So I called Laura. Brief, factual, no drama. They found a small growth on my adrenal gland. It's benign. I need a minor surgery. I'll be fine. That was it. That's all I said. 3 days later, my neighbor Peggy, sweet woman, lives 2 houses down, brings me tomatoes from her garden every August. Stopped me in the driveway. She had that look, the one people get at funerals, right before they squeeze your hand and say something useless. Howard, how are you holding up? Holding up from what? Laura mentioned, well, she said you were sick. Really sick, I just want you to know. We're all thinking about you. I thanked her and went inside. The next morning at the hardware store on Lamar Boulevard, a guy from my weekend fishing group grabbed my arm. Pierce, I heard. Listen, whatever you need, brother. We're here for you. I didn't ask what he'd heard. I already knew. Someone, Laura, Travis, or both, had taken my benign diagnosis and turned it into a tragedy. I was dying, apparently. The whole neighborhood knew. The fishing group knew. People were looking at me like I was already half in the ground. I remember standing in my workshop that afternoon, running my hand along a piece of white oak I'd been shaping for a dining table. I thought about Laura at 7 years old, sitting on a stool in this same shop, watching me work. She'd hand me sandpaper when I asked. She'd blow on the shavings and laugh when they scattered. One time she said, Daddy, when I grow up, I want to build things like you. I told her she could build anything she wanted. That was 27 years ago. Now she was building a case to take everything I had. I drove to her house, a rental in Circle C Ranch, $3,200 a month, more than they could afford. But Travis always needed things to look right. I pulled up to the curb. Travis was on the porch, leaning against the railing with a glass of iced tea, like he was posing for a magazine cover. He saw me coming and straightened up, put on that smile. Howard, good to see you. Come on in. I'm fine right here. I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Travis, I want to know what you told people about my health. What do you mean? My neighbor thinks I'm dying. A guy from my fishing group thinks I'm dying. My doctor says I have a benign growth that needs a routine surgery. So somewhere between my mouth and their ears, the story changed. I want to know where. Travis sipped his tea, calm, controlled. Howard, we were just concerned. People asked about you, and Laura mentioned you were having health issues. She's worried. We both are. People have a right to know when someone they care about is going through something. Going through something, I repeated. Is that what this is? Don't dramatize it. I looked at him for a long moment. Travis is 6'1", broad shoulders, full head of hair, perfect teeth. He looks like the kind of man you'd trust with your retirement plan. That's what makes him effective, and that's what makes him dangerous. Travis, I said, the day I need you to manage my health or my property will be the day I can't tie my own shoes. And as you can see, I lifted one boot. I'm doing just fine. He didn't laugh. Laura appeared in the doorway behind him, but didn't come out. She just stood there, half hidden, like she wasn't sure whose side of the door she belonged on. I drove home. The mailbox was full. Electric bill, a flyer for gutter cleaning, and a white envelope with a return address I didn't recognize. Henderson and Park, attorneys at law. I opened it in the kitchen. It was a formal notice. An inquiry had been submitted regarding the valuation of assets belonging to Howard J. Pierce, including residential property at 1247 Ridgeview Lane, for the purpose of protecting family interests in the event of incapacitation. The inquiry had been filed by Laura Cole. I checked the date stamp. It was filed 9 days before I told Laura about my diagnosis. 9 days before. I set the letter down on the table. I poured myself a glass of water. I drank it slowly. She hadn't filed this because she was worried about my health. She'd filed it before she even knew I was sick. The diagnosis didn't start this. It just gave them a better story. I sat there in my kitchen, in the house I'd lived in for almost half my life, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger. That would come later. Not sadness. Something quieter. Something colder. I looked at the power of attorney still sitting on the counter where I'd left it. Then at the letter from Henderson and Park. Then at the biopsy results in the drawer. 3 documents. 3 pieces of a puzzle I didn't ask to solve. But here's the thing about building furniture for 4 decades. You learn to see the grain. You learn to see where the wood is sound and where it's rotten. And you learn that rotten wood doesn't fix itself. You have to cut it out. I picked up my phone. I had 3 calls to make, and none of them were to my daughter. I sat at the kitchen table that night with a yellow legal pad and a ballpoint pen. No computer, no phone. Just me and a blank page and the kind of silence that helps you think. I wrote down everything I knew. 1. Laura had brought me a power of attorney naming Travis as my agent, with full authority over my property. 2. Someone had told everyone in my life that I was dying, when my doctor had said the opposite. 3. Laura had filed a legal inquiry into the value of my assets through the law firm Henderson and Park, and she'd done it 9 days before I ever told her about my diagnosis. I stared at that last line for a long time. 9 days before. That's not a reaction. That's not a worried daughter making a panicked call. That's a plan, and plans don't write themselves. I tapped the pen against the pad. In my workshop, when I get a piece of lumber that looks good on the surface but feels wrong in my hands, I flip it over. I check the underside. I look for cracks, for soft spots, for grain that runs the wrong direction. Most people don't do that with people. They take the surface and call it truth. I used to do that with Travis, not anymore. I made 3 calls. The first was to my older brother Dennis, who lives up in Dallas. Dennis Watson. Different last name, same mother, long story. He's 71, a retired Army veteran, and the kind of man who says exactly what he thinks, whether you asked or not. We talk every few weeks, mostly about fishing and football. This time, I skipped the small talk. Dennis, I need your help, but first I have to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting. That bad? That complicated? I told him everything. The power of attorney, the rumors, the letter from Henderson and Park, the timeline. When I finished, there was a pause. Dennis doesn't pause often. And then he said, Howard, you're telling me your own daughter is trying to take your house. I'm telling you my son-in-law is trying to take my house. And my daughter is holding the door open for him. What do you need from me? I don't know yet, but when I do, I need to know you'll pick up the phone. I'll pick up the phone. The second call was to the Texas State Bar Association's referral line. I told the woman on the other end that I needed a lawyer who handled real estate law and family disputes, specifically someone who understood property protection and guardianship proceedings in Travis County. She gave me 3 names. One of them was Russell Barnes at Barnes & Associates on Congress Avenue. The third call was to Barnes himself. I got his voicemail. His voice was flat, professional, no warmth, I liked that immediately. I left a message. My name is Howard Pierce. I'm 64 years old. I own a house and a business in Austin. My daughter and her husband are trying to take both. I need someone who knows what to do about that. Please call me back. He called back within 2 hours. Mr. Pierce, tell me everything in order and bring every document you have, every letter, every message, every email. I'm at 816 Congress Avenue, Suite 504. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. The next morning, I drove downtown with a manila folder on the passenger seat. Inside, the deed to my house, my property tax records, the biopsy results, and my doctor's written assessment, the power of attorney Laura had tried to get me to sign, the letter from Henderson and Park, and printed screenshots of text messages from Laura. 6 months' worth. Barnes's office was on the 5th floor of a stone building with tall windows and no decoration. The man himself matched the space. 56, maybe 57. Gray suit, no tie. Glasses that sat low on his nose. He didn't shake my hand, he just pointed to a chair and said, "Sit. Talk." I talked for 20 minutes. He didn't interrupt once. Then he took my folder and went through every document, one by one, for almost 40 minutes. He made notes on a legal pad with handwriting so small I couldn't read it upside down. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me. "Mr. Pierce, your daughter and her husband are being aggressive, but they haven't crossed a legal line yet. The power of attorney. You didn't sign it. The inquiry through Henderson and Park. It's unusual, but it's not illegal. The rumors about your health. Tasteless, but not actionable. So there's nothing I can do." I didn't say that. I said they haven't crossed the line yet. Our job is to make sure that if they do, and based on what I'm seeing they will, we're ready. Completely ready. He set his pen down. "Mr. Pierce, your house, is it held in a living trust, or is it titled solely in your name?" "Just my name." Barnes took off his glasses and cleaned them. Slowly. The way people do when they're about to say something you won't like. "Then we need to move quickly. Because if they file a guardianship petition, a legal request to have you declared incapacitated, with your daughter named as your guardian, your property could be frozen. Everything. The house, your bank accounts, your business assets. You wouldn't be able to sell, transfer, or protect any of it until the court rules, and that process can take months. I felt the chair get harder beneath me. They can do that? Just file a piece of paper and freeze my life? They can file. Whether they succeed is a different question, but the filing alone creates a legal hold, and right now, Mr. Pierce, you have nothing in place to prevent it." I looked at the folder on his desk. 40 years of my life, reduced to paper. "Then let's start building something," I said. Things moved fast after that first meeting with Barnes. Not reckless fast, deliberate fast. The kind of speed you need when someone is coming for what's yours and they think you don't know it. Within 5 days, Barnes had drafted a revocable living trust, a legal structure that would hold everything I owned. My house, appraised at $735,000. My savings, $112,000 across 2 accounts. My workshop and its equipment, valued at $48,000. All of it would be transferred into the trust, with me as the sole trustee, meaning I still controlled everything, could change anything, could revoke the whole thing if I wanted, but the property would no longer be sitting in my name like an unlocked car in a bad neighborhood. The successor trustee, the person who'd take over if something happened to me, was Dennis. Not Laura, not Travis. Dennis. I signed the documents at Barnes's office on a Wednesday afternoon. 2 witnesses present, a notary who stamped every page. Barnes handed me the copies and said, "Mr. Pierce, as of today, your property is protected. If they file a guardianship petition now, the trust assets are outside the reach of any temporary guardian. They can challenge the trust, but that's a different fight, and a much harder one for them to win." I drove home feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not relief, I wasn't naive enough for that, but control. I had a grip on something again. The next step was Travis. I needed to know what he was doing. Not what he was saying to Laura, not what he was telling the neighbors, but what he was actually doing, behind the curtain, where the real moves happen. I found Nate Simmons through a licensed investigator directory, online. Former Houston police detective, now private. Licensed in Texas, number A22047, if you want to check. I called him. We met at a diner on Burnett Road, and I laid it out. Mr. Simmons, I need to know what my son-in-law is up to, who he's meeting with, what properties he's looking at, whether he's talked to any lawyers, whether he's talked to any developers. I don't need guesses. I need documentation. Simmons was a quiet man. 48, medium build, the kind of face you forget 5 minutes after you see it, which I suppose is exactly what you want in a private investigator. He listened, asked 3 questions, all sharp, all relevant, and quoted me his rate. $4,500 retainer, $150 per hour after that. I wrote the check on the spot. Give me 10 days, he said. While I was building my defenses, Travis was building his attack. Laura called me twice that week. The first time she asked if I'd thought about the power of attorney. I told her I was still thinking. The second time her voice was tighter, more rehearsed. Dad, Travis and I have been talking, and we really think it would be best if we had some legal protections in place. For you, in case your health gets worse. My health is fine, Laura. The doctor said I have a benign growth that needs a routine procedure. That's what the doctor said. What did Travis say the doctor said? She went quiet. I could almost hear Travis in the background, coaching her. She hung up without answering. What I found out later, from Simmons' report, is that Travis also called my doctor's office twice that week, identifying himself as a family representative and requesting my medical records. Both times, the office refused. HIPAA, the federal law protecting patient privacy, meant they couldn't share a word without my written consent. Travis didn't know I knew about those calls, but I knew. 10 days after I hired him, Simmons came to my house. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Laura had slid that power of attorney across to me, and opened a folder. Mr. Pierce, your son-in-law has been busy. He laid out 2 photographs, time-stamped. The first showed Travis sitting across from a man in a blue blazer at a coffee shop on South Lamar. The second showed the same 2 men standing outside, shaking hands next to a black SUV with a company logo on the door. The man is Greg Holloway. He's a land acquisition agent for Lone Star Developments. They're a residential development company that's been buying parcels in the Barton Hills area for a planned housing complex. 18 lots so far, ranging from $680,000 to $910,000. I looked at the photos. Travis was smiling in both of them, that big, confident, camera-ready smile. They met twice, Simmons continued. The first meeting lasted 45 minutes, the second about an hour. I wasn't able to record the conversations. Texas is a one-party consent state, but I wasn't a party. What I can tell you is that Holloway pulled up a map on his tablet during the second meeting, and your son-in-law pointed to a specific area on it. I cross-referenced the location. He paused. It's your property, Mr. Pierce. 1,247 Ridgeview Lane, 0.8 acres. Travis Cole was discussing the sale of your land with the developer. Land that he doesn't own. Land that he has no legal right to sell. I sat back in my chair. I looked at those 2 photos for a long time. The smile, the handshake, the logo on the SUV, my son-in-law selling my home to a stranger while telling the neighborhood I was dying. I thanked Simmons, paid his invoice, $6,150 total, including the retainer, put the photos in my folder with everything else. Then I walked out to my workshop and stood there in the dark, surrounded by half-finished furniture and the smell of walnut shavings. Travis thought he was the smartest person in this story. He thought he was 3 moves ahead. But he didn't know about Barnes. He didn't know about the trust. He didn't know about Simmons. And he certainly didn't know that his father-in-law, the quiet old man with sawdust on his boots, was already 5 moves ahead of him. I had the documents. I had the evidence. Now I needed a stage, and Thanksgiving was 2 months away. About 6 weeks before Thanksgiving, the envelope arrived. Not from Laura this time. Not from Travis. From the Travis County Probate Court. I was standing at the mailbox in the late afternoon, still wearing my work apron, and I recognized the county seal before I even opened it. Inside was a formal notice. Laura Cole had filed a guardianship petition, requesting that the court declare me, Howard J. Pierce, incapacitated, and appoint her as my legal guardian, full authority, over my finances, my property, my medical decisions, everything. The grounds listed in the petition read, "The proposed ward suffers from a serious medical condition that impairs cognitive function and the ability to make rational decisions regarding personal and financial matters." Attached were 2 sworn affidavits, one from a woman named Jessica Tran, a co-worker of Laura's, who stated she'd visited me and observed me appearing disoriented and speaking incoherently. The second from a man named Derek Marsh, one of Travis's golf buddies, who claimed I'd been confused about basic details during a conversation at a neighborhood barbecue. I read Jessica Tran's statement 3 times. I'd met her once for about 8 minutes when Laura brought her by the house to see Dad's workshop. She'd barely said 2 words to me. And Derek Marsh, I'd spoken to him exactly 1 time at a 4th of July gathering about brisket. He asked me where I bought my smoker. I told him. That was the entire conversation. These people didn't know me. They'd been recruited, coached, handed a script, and told to sign at the bottom. I called Barnes. He picked up on the second ring. "I got the petition. I expected it. I've already drafted an objection. I'll file it tomorrow morning. I'm also attaching a medical evaluation from your doctor confirming full cognitive capacity, along with the biopsy results and his written statement that the tumor is benign and the recommended surgery is routine. Mr. Pierce, this petition will not succeed. But they want to slow you down. They want you scared. I'm not scared, Russell. Good. Because the hearing is set for 3 weeks from now, and between now and then we have work to do." I hung up and stood in my kitchen for a while. I wasn't lying. I wasn't scared. But I was something I hadn't let myself be in a long time. I was angry. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that makes you slam doors or raise your voice. The kind that settles in your chest like a coal and stays hot for days. My own daughter had signed a legal document asking the state of Texas to take away my rights. She'd found people willing to lie under oath. She'd used my diagnosis, the one I'd trusted her with, as ammunition. I walked out to the workshop. I didn't have any client orders due that week, so I pulled a piece of red oak from the rack and started building a stool. No plan, no sketch. Just wood and tools and 4 hours of silence. When I build, I don't think in words. I think in shapes, in joints, in the way one piece fits against another. By the time I finished, the stool was done. Clean lines, solid legs, the kind of thing you could sit on for 50 years without it wobbling. I went inside, washed my hands, and called Barnes at 10 that night. He picked up. The man apparently never slept. "Russell, I want something clear. When we go to that hearing, I don't just want the petition dismissed. I want the judge to see exactly who filed it and why. I want Simmons's report, the photos, the meetings with the developer, everything. For that, I'll need every piece of documentation your investigator has. Can you have it to me by the end of the week?" "You'll have it tomorrow." There was a pause. Then Barnes said, "Mr. Pierce, I'll be honest with you. Most clients in your position want to hide. You want to put on a show. I want to put on the truth, Russell. If that's a show, then yes." After I hung up, I sat with my phone for another minute. Then I scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I'd saved weeks ago but never called. Catherine Cole. Travis's younger sister, 31 years old, a nurse at a hospital in San Antonio. I'd met her exactly twice, once at Laura and Travis's wedding, once at a family cookout the following summer. Both times she'd been polite, warm, and nothing like her brother. I typed a message. "Catherine, this is Howard Pierce, Travis's father-in-law. I'd like to talk with you. Not about Travis. About the truth. Would you meet me for coffee?" She replied within the hour. "Mr. Pierce, I've been wondering when someone would call." We met 3 days later at a diner halfway between Austin and San Antonio, off Interstate 35. She was already seated, a small woman with dark hair pulled back, wearing scrubs under a jacket. She looked worried in a way that had nothing to do with work. "Mr. Pierce," she said as I sat down, "before you say anything, I want you to know that I love my brother, but I'm not blind. I'm not asking you to choose sides, Catherine. I'm asking you to listen." I told her about the power of attorney, the rumors, the guardianship petition, the meetings with Lone Star Developments. She listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, her eyes getting harder with every sentence. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "He's done this before." 5 words. They landed like a hammer on a nail head. I didn't push her. Not then. I just nodded and said, "When you're ready to tell me about that, I'll be ready to listen." On the drive home, I made one more decision. The surgery for my adrenal tumor was already scheduled. My doctor had been patient, but he'd been clear that the procedure needed to happen. I called his office the next morning and confirmed I'd do it 2 weeks before the hearing. Quietly. No announcements, no phone calls to Laura or Travis. I'd walk into that courtroom healthy with a clean bill of health in my pocket and a folder full of evidence in my briefcase, and they wouldn't see any of it coming. Thanksgiving morning, I was up before the sun. I'd bought the turkey 3 days earlier. 22 pounds, fresh, from a farm stand on Highway 290. I rubbed it down with butter, salt, rosemary, and black pepper, and slid it into the oven at 6 sharp. The house smelled like roasting poultry by 8. By noon, it smelled like the kind of home you'd want to come back to. I'd invited everyone, Laura and Travis, my brother Dennis, who'd driven down from Dallas the night before and was sleeping in the guest room, Cheryl Cole, Travis's mother, who'd come up from San Antonio, Catherine Cole, who'd driven in that same morning, and 3 neighbors, Peggy, who brought tomatoes in August and Pitty in September, and the Hendersons from across the street. I wanted witnesses, not the legal kind, the human kind, people who knew me, people who'd heard the rumors, people who deserved to hear the truth from my mouth, not from Travis's. Dennis helped me set the table. 12 chairs around the big oak dining table I'd built in 1996. White tablecloth, good plates, the ones I only used once a year. Dennis looked at me while he folded napkins and said, "You sure about this?" I've never been more sure about anything. "Then I'll be right here." The guests started arriving around 2. Peggy came first with a casserole dish and that look of gentle concern she'd been wearing around me for weeks. The Hendersons brought wine. Cheryl Cole arrived in a gray sedan wearing a floral blouse and a tight smile that reminded me of her son's. Then Laura and Travis pulled up. Travis stepped out of the car in a crisp navy button-down, sleeves rolled to the elbows. He walked in like he owned the place, which I suppose was the point. He shook hands with the neighbors, kissed Cheryl on the cheek, clapped Dennis on the shoulder like they were old friends. Dennis didn't flinch, but I saw his jaw tighten. Laura followed behind Travis, quieter than usual, her eyes scanning the room the way people do when they're looking for exits. Catherine arrived last. She came in quietly, hugged her mother, nodded at Travis. He barely looked at her. She caught my eye across the room and gave me the smallest nod. So small nobody else would have noticed. But I did. By 3 o'clock, everyone was seated. The turkey was ready. I was in the kitchen, pulling it from the oven, when I heard Travis's voice carry from the dining room. He'd stood up. He was speaking to the table. All of them seated, looking up at him like he was giving a toast. I want to say a few words before we start. This is, well, it's a special occasion. Most of you know that Howard, my father-in-law, has been going through a very difficult time, health-wise. He paused. Let the weight of it land. His voice dropped half a register, the way a salesman's does when he's about to close a deal. The truth is, he's not going to be with us much longer. He's sick, and we wanted this holiday to be something he could remember, something meaningful. Maybe, and I hope I'm wrong, maybe this is his last Thanksgiving in this house. Cheryl nodded slowly, dabbing at her eye with a napkin. Peggy pressed her hand to her chest. The Hendersons exchanged an uncomfortable glance. Catherine stared at her brother, and this time I could read her expression perfectly. It was disgust, held just below the surface like a current under still water. I picked up the turkey platter, 22 pounds of golden brown bird, crisp skin, steam rising. I carried it out of the kitchen and into the dining room. I heard every word he said, every single one. I set the platter down in the center of the table, slowly, carefully, the way you place a piece of furniture you've spent weeks building. You don't rush the reveal. I wiped my hands on the dish towel hanging from my shoulder. I folded it, set it on the counter behind me. Then I looked at Travis. He was still standing. His hand was resting on the back of Laura's chair. His face carried that practiced expression. Part sympathy, part authority. All performance. He looked at me the way you look at someone you've already written off. I smiled. Not the polite kind, not the warm kind. The kind of smile that comes from knowing something the other person doesn't. The kind that makes the room shift, even though nothing visible has changed. Nobody spoke. The silence lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4, but it stretched like taffy. Travis's smile didn't drop, but it froze. The edges stopped moving. His eyes narrowed just a fraction, the way an animal's do when it senses something wrong, but can't identify the direction it's coming from. His hand slid off the back of Laura's chair and fell to his side. Laura looked up at me and something crossed her face. Not guilt, not yet. Something older than that. Recognition. She'd seen that look on my face before, years ago, when a supplier tried to cheat me on a lumber order, and I sat across from him without raising my voice until he refunded every cent. She knew what that look meant, or her lips parted like she was going to speak, but nothing came out. Cheryl stopped nodding. Peggy's hand slowly lowered from her chest. The Hendersons went very still. Catherine picked up her water glass and took a sip. Calm, measured, like she was settling in for the next act. Dennis unfolded his napkin and laid it across his lap without a word. He didn't look at Travis. He didn't need to. He looked at me, one veteran to another. Ready. I pulled out my chair, sat down, placed both hands flat on the table. The turkey sat between us all, golden and steaming, and for a moment the only sound in the room was the ticking of the wall clock I'd hung in 1989. Well, I said, let's eat. Nobody moved. 10 people around a table, and not a single fork lifted. The turkey sat in the center like a monument, steam rising between us. Travis was still standing, his hand hovering near the back of Laura's chair, and I could see his mind working, trying to calculate whether to sit down, walk out, or say something clever to retake the room. Laura beat him to it. She pushed her chair back and stood up. Her voice cracked on the first word. Dad, I'm sorry. He shouldn't have said that. Not like that. He was just trying to... I raised my hand. Not fast. Not aggressive. The way you stop a dog from crossing a road. She went quiet. Sit down, Laura. My voice was level, calm. The way Lake Travis looks at 6 in the morning. Flat, smooth, and deeper than you think. Sit down, because I have news, too. She sat. Travis finally lowered himself into his chair, slowly, like a man who just realized the ground might not be solid. I reached into the breast pocket of my shirt and pulled out a white envelope. I'd been carrying it all day, through the brining, the basting, the cooking. It had a crease down the middle from where I'd folded it that morning. I set it on the table, right next to the cranberry sauce. News number 1, I'd opened the envelope and slid out a single sheet of paper. The tumor they found on my adrenal gland, the one that has apparently convinced half this neighborhood I'm on my way out, was benign. It was always benign. My doctor told me that the day the biopsy came back. 3 weeks ago, I had the surgery. Laparoscopic. Outpatient. I was back in my workshop 2 days later. I held up the discharge summary. This is the paperwork. I'm healthy. Completely. The room shifted. Peggy's mouth opened slightly. Mr. Henderson leaned forward. Cheryl Cole's eyes went to Travis, then back to me, then down to her lap. Travis tried. I'll give him that. He stretched his lips into something resembling a smile and said, Well, that's wonderful news, Howard. We're all so relieved. I'm not finished. I didn't look at him. I looked at the table. At all of them. News number 2. About 2 weeks before the surgery, my daughter Laura and her husband Travis filed a petition in Travis County Probate Court. A guardianship petition. Do you know what that is? I looked around the table. Peggy shook her head. It's a legal request to have someone declared mentally incapacitated, unable to manage their own affairs. They wanted a judge to strip me of my rights, my financial rights, my medical decisions, my property, and hand all of it to Laura. The silence now was different, heavier. I could hear someone's breathing, Cheryl's, I think, short and shallow. The judge reviewed the petition. He reviewed the medical evidence, my doctor's sworn statement that I am fully competent, fully lucid, and fully capable of managing my own life. The petition was dismissed entirely, and my attorney filed a countersuit for abuse of process. The court sanctioned both petitioners, Laura Cole and Travis Cole, with a fine of $12,500. Laura's face had gone white. Not pink, not flushed. White. Like someone had pulled a plug and drained the color out of her. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking at the tablecloth. Travis's jaw was tight. His nostrils flared slightly, and his right hand was gripping the edge of the table hard enough to whiten his knuckles. News number 3. I pulled a second set of papers from the envelope. 2 photographs printed on standard paper, clear and time-stamped. I laid them face up on the table and slid them toward the center so everyone could see. My private investigator documented 2 meetings between Travis Cole and a land acquisition agent named Greg Holloway, who works for Lone Star Developments, a company that's been buying property in Barton Hills for a planned residential complex. In these meetings, Travis discussed the sale of my land, my property, 1,247 Ridgeview Lane, 0.8 acres, a property that belongs to me and has never, not for a single day, belonged to him. Travis shot up from his chair. That is not true. Those photos don't prove... I turned to him. First time all evening, I looked directly at his face. I took my time. Sit down. My voice didn't rise. If anything, it dropped. You are in my house, at my table, eating my turkey, and you will sit down when I'm talking. He stood there for 2 seconds, maybe 3. Every eye in the room was on him. Dennis was watching him the way a man watches a rattlesnake, still, focused, ready. Catherine had set down her fork and folded her hands in her lap. Cheryl was staring at her own plate like she wished she could disappear into it. Travis sat down. The room was mine now. Every pair of eyes, every held breath, every heartbeat in that dining room. Mine. I could feel it the way you feel a piece of wood surrender to the plane when the angle is right and the blade is sharp. No resistance, just truth, coming through clean. I looked around the table one more time. There's one more thing, one last piece of news, but I'll share that after dessert. I picked up the carving knife and held it over the turkey. Now? Who wants dark meat? The most uncomfortable meal I've ever hosted lasted 47 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. Nobody spoke above a murmur. Peggy complimented the turkey twice, the same compliment, word for word, because she didn't know what else to say. Mr. Henderson ate steadily, eyes on his plate, the way a man eats when he wants to finish and leave. His wife barely touched her food. Dennis ate slowly and deliberately, like a man who had nowhere else to be. Travis and Laura sat side by side, but there was a distance between them now that had nothing to do with chairs. Travis kept leaning toward her, whispering. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the rhythm. Short, urgent, clipped. Laura didn't respond. She moved food around her plate with her fork and didn't eat a single bite. Catherine sat across from her brother. At one point during a lull, she said quietly, Travis, is it true? Did you try to sell his property? Travis's head snapped toward her. You don't understand the situation. Catherine tilted her head. I understand enough. Travis opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at his mother. Cheryl didn't look back. She was staring at the centerpiece, a glass bowl of autumn leaves I'd put together that morning, as if it were the most fascinating thing she'd ever seen. After the main course, I cleared the plates myself. Dennis stood to help, but I waved him off. I wanted to do this alone. I carried the dishes to the kitchen, rinsed them, and took the apple pie from the counter. I'd baked it the night before, from scratch, the same recipe I'd used every Thanksgiving for 30 years. I cut it into neat slices, set them on plates, and carried them out. When the last plate was down and the last fork was picked up, I reached under my chair. I'd placed a manila folder there before the guests arrived, taped to the underside of the seat. I peeled it off, set it on the table, and opened it. Inside was a copy of my revocable living trust. 22 pages, notarized, witnessed, legally airtight. I didn't pass it around. I just held it up so everyone could see the cover page. This is a revocable living trust. As of 2 months ago, everything I own, my house, my savings, my workshop, and all its equipment, has been transferred into this trust. I am the sole trustee. I control everything. If something happens to me, the successor trustee is my brother Dennis. I nodded toward him. Dennis nodded back. Not Laura, not Travis. Dennis. Laura's eyes filled. She wasn't crying, not yet, but the surface tension was about to break. Laura is listed as a beneficiary in this trust. She will receive her share. But there is a condition. I paused. Let the silence do the work. Laura will receive her inheritance after 10 years, or sooner, if she meets one requirement. She ends her marriage to Travis Cole. The room didn't gasp. It went vacuum silent, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. As long as she remains married to a man who tried to have me declared insane, who spread lies about my health to everyone I know, and who attempted to sell my home behind my back, she gets nothing. Not a dollar, not a single board from my workshop. Laura's voice came out thin and stretched, like a wire about to snap. Dad, you can't do this. I looked at her, my daughter, the little girl who used to sit on a stool in my workshop and blow on wood shavings, the woman who'd signed a document to take away my freedom. Laura, I've spent my whole life working with wood. I know what rot looks like, even when the surface is smooth and polished. The words landed. I saw them hit. Her chin trembled. She looked down. Travis stood up, grabbed Laura's arm, and pulled her to her feet. We're leaving! His voice was hard now. No more charm, no more warmth. The mask had come off, and underneath was exactly what I'd expected. Cold calculation turning to fury. You'll hear from my lawyer. You can't. I can. I did. And your lawyer can call my lawyer. Russell Barnes and Associates, 816 Congress Avenue. He'll be expecting the call. Travis pulled Laura toward the door. Cheryl stood and followed, her purse clutched against her chest, her eyes never meeting mine. The door closed behind them with a sound that felt permanent. The Hendersons left quietly. Peggy squeezed my hand on her way out and whispered, Howard, I had no idea. I thanked her. Catherine stayed. She was still sitting at the table, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, looking at me with an expression I hadn't expected. Not pity, not shock. Respect. Mr. Pierce, I'm sorry. I didn't know what he was doing to you. I know you didn't, Catherine. That's why you're here. She looked down at her coffee. There's something I need to tell you. About our aunt in San Antonio. But not tonight. Whenever you're ready. Dennis helped me wash the dishes. We didn't talk much. When we finished, he dried his hands, hung the towel on the hook by the stove, and said, That was the best Thanksgiving I've ever been to. I almost laughed. Almost. The next morning, I checked my phone. One message from Barnes, sent at 7 a.m. Travis Cole has retained an attorney. They plan to challenge the validity of the trust. Prepare yourself. This isn't over. I set the phone down and poured my coffee. Through the kitchen window, I could see my workshop across the yard, the morning light hitting the tin roof. I had a bookshelf to finish for a client in Round Rock, Walnut, clean lines, the kind of work that requires patience, precision, and a steady hand. It wasn't over, but I was ready for the next round. The lawsuit arrived 2 weeks after Thanksgiving. Formal, typed, filed by an attorney named Gordon Leach out of a small firm on the east side of town. The claim, my revocable living trust, was invalid on the grounds that I had been under severe emotional duress and lacked the rational capacity to execute binding legal documents. I read it twice, then drove to Barnes's office. Barnes had already seen the filing. He was sitting behind his desk with his glasses on, marking up a copy with a red pen, and he didn't look worried. He looked almost amused, or as close to amused as a man like Russell Barnes gets. This is a desperation move, Mr. Pierce. The trust was executed with 2 independent witnesses, notarized and accompanied by a medical evaluation confirming your full cognitive capacity. They'd need to prove undue influence or incapacity, and they have evidence for neither. This will not succeed. Then why file it? Time. They need time. Your son-in-law is drowning in debt. $43,200 in credit card balances, and he's 2 months behind on rent. That's $6,400 in back payments on that house in Circle C Ranch. He's stalling, hoping you'll settle, hoping you'll get tired. I leaned back in my chair. I don't get tired, Russell. I build furniture. You sand a tabletop for 3 hours to get it right. You think a court filing is going to wear me out? Barnes almost smiled. Almost. Good. Because there's something else. I received a call this morning from Catherine Cole. Catherine. I hadn't spoken to her since Thanksgiving night, when she'd stayed at the table after everyone else left and told me there was something about an aunt in San Antonio. I'd told her to take her time. She had. She wants to meet with us, both of us. She says she has documents. We met 3 days later, Barnes, Catherine, and me, in Barnes's office. Catherine brought a folder. Inside were bank records, a notarized power of attorney, and a property transfer deed. She spread them across Barnes's desk and told us what happened. 3 years earlier, Travis had approached their aunt, Margaret Cole, 78 years old, living alone in San Antonio, and convinced her to sign a durable power of attorney, naming him as her agent. He'd told her it was for emergencies. Within 4 months, he'd used that authority to sell her duplex, a 2-unit property on the south side of San Antonio, for $285,000. The money went directly into an account in Travis's name. Margaret never saw a cent of it. Where is your aunt now? Barnes asked. In a state-funded assisted living facility in Bezzar County. She has no savings, no property. She lives on Medicaid. Catherine's voice was steady, but her hands were tight in her lap. I didn't know about this until after Thanksgiving. I started digging. I called Aunt Margaret. She told me everything. She was ashamed. She thought it was her fault for trusting him. Barnes took the documents. He studied them for 20 minutes without speaking. Then he looked up. Ms. Cole, this is a pattern of conduct. Your brother didn't target Mr. Pierce on impulse. He has a method. He identifies vulnerable family members, establishes trust, obtains legal authority, and liquidates their assets. This isn't just relevant to our case. This could be criminal. Elder financial abuse under Texas law. Catherine nodded. I know. That's why I brought it to you. Barnes filed the new evidence as a supplemental exhibit in our countersuit. He also submitted a formal request that the court consider the pattern of conduct when evaluating Travis's credibility. The judge assigned to the case, the Honorable Patricia Reynolds of Travis County Probate Court, reviewed the filings and scheduled a final hearing for early February. Meanwhile, something shifted between Laura and Travis. I heard about it from Catherine, who heard it from Cheryl. They were fighting, loud, frequent, bitter. Laura had moved into the guest room. Travis was sleeping on the couch some nights. The $12,500 fine from the guardianship petition had hit them hard. On top of the credit card debt and the back rent, it was a financial gut punch they couldn't absorb. Simmons, who was still keeping an eye on things for me, reported that Lone Star Developments had stopped returning Travis's calls. The deal was dead. The developer had moved on to other parcels. Travis had gambled on stealing my land, and the table had been swept clean. And now, with the trust lawsuit stalling and the Aunt Margaret evidence on the table, the walls were closing in from every direction. A week before the hearing, I was in my workshop, finishing a coat of lacquer on a walnut bookshelf, when I heard a car pull into the driveway. I wiped my hands and walked to the front of the house. Laura was standing on the porch, alone. No Travis, no rehearsed smile, no documents in her hand. She was wearing jeans and a wrinkled jacket, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Dad, her voice was small. I made a mistake, a huge mistake. What do I do? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She wasn't performing. She wasn't angling. She was standing on my porch in the cold, asking for help, and for once I believed she meant it. I opened the front door. Come inside, Laura. I'll put the coffee on. The hearing was held on a Thursday morning in the Travis County Probate Courthouse, a stone building downtown with high ceilings and the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own breathing. Barnes and I arrived at 8:30. We sat at a table on the left side of the courtroom. Our folder was 3 inches thick. Travis arrived with his attorney, Gordon Leach, a short man in a brown suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Travis was wearing the same kind of crisp button-down he'd worn to Thanksgiving, but the effect was different now. His collar was slightly wrinkled. His jaw was tight. He didn't look at me when he walked in. He looked at the floor. Laura was there, too. She sat in the gallery, not at the respondent's table. She'd moved out of the house on Oak Hollow Drive 3 weeks earlier. She was staying with a coworker. Catherine sat 2 rows behind her, hands folded, quiet. Judge Reynolds, a woman in her early 60s with silver hair and reading glasses, called the session to order and laid out the 3 matters before her. Travis Cole's petition to invalidate the trust, my countersuit for abusive process, and the supplemental evidence regarding Margaret Cole. Leach went first. He argued that I had created the trust in a state of heightened emotional distress, and that the document did not reflect my true intentions. He spoke for 12 minutes. He cited no case law. He presented no expert testimony. He didn't even mention the medical evaluation. Barnes stood up. He spoke for 9 minutes. He presented my doctor's sworn affidavit, confirming full cognitive capacity at the time of signing. He presented the notarized trust document with 2 independent witnesses. He presented photographs from Simmons's investigation. Travis meeting with Greg Holloway of Lone Star Developments, time-stamped and geolocated. He presented the Henderson and Park inquiry letter, filed 9 days before Laura even knew about my diagnosis. Then he called Catherine Cole to the stand. Catherine walked to the witness chair, took the oath, and sat down. She didn't look at Travis. She looked at the judge. She described what Travis had done to their Aunt Margaret, the power of attorney, the sale of the duplex for $285,000, the money transferred to Travis's personal account, Margaret's current situation, living in a state-funded facility, no assets, no savings. Catherine presented copies of the bank transfer records, the property deed, and a written statement from Margaret herself. When she finished, the courtroom was quiet. Not the polite kind of quiet, the kind that comes when everyone in the room understands what they just heard. I looked at Travis. His face had gone the color of old plaster. His attorney was writing something on a legal pad, but his pen had stopped moving. Travis sat perfectly still, staring at the table in front of him, and for the first time since I'd known him, he had nothing to say. No charm, no argument, no spin. Just a man at a table, watching his own reflection crack. Judge Reynolds took 15 minutes to review the materials. Then she delivered her ruling. First, Travis Cole's petition to invalidate the revocable living trust was denied. The trust was legally sound, properly executed, and supported by medical evidence of the grantor's full capacity. Second, my countersuit for abuse of process was granted. The court imposed sanctions of $18,750 on Travis and Laura Cole, $12,500 for the frivolous guardianship petition, and $6,250 for the meritless challenge to the trust. Third, the evidence regarding Margaret Cole was referred to the Bexar County District Attorney's Office in San Antonio for investigation of potential elder financial abuse under Texas Penal Code. Travis didn't react. He just sat there, hands flat on the table, like a man who'd been unplugged. Leach whispered something to him. Travis didn't respond. Cheryl, who had been sitting in the back row, stood up and left the courtroom without a word. She didn't look at her son. She didn't look at anyone. After the judge adjourned, I stood up and buttoned my jacket. Barnes shook my hand. One firm shake, no extras. "You're protected, Mr. Pierce, completely." I thanked him. Laura was waiting in the hallway. She looked different from the woman who'd slid a power of attorney across my kitchen table all those months ago. Thinner, quieter, but her eyes were clear. "Dad, I filed for divorce last week. The papers are already with the court." I looked at her for a long time. My daughter, the girl who used to blow on wood shavings in my workshop and laugh. "That's not for me, Laura. That's for you." She nodded. Her chin trembled, but she held it together. I didn't hug her. We weren't there yet. But I didn't walk away either. "I'll be home if you need me," I said, and I meant it. I drove back to Ridgeview Lane, parked in the driveway, walked past the house and straight to the workshop. I unlocked the door, turned on the overhead light, and looked at the walnut bookshelf I'd been working on, the one for a client in Round Rock. It was almost done. Clean lines, solid joints, the kind of piece that would last a lifetime if you took care of it. I picked up my chisel, turned on the radio, some country station, low volume, more noise than music. I ran my hand along the edge of the shelf, feeling for imperfections, found one. a slight ridge where two pieces met. I shaved it down with 3 careful strokes until the surface was seamless. Outside the window, the Texas sun was low and warm for February. The live oaks in the yard were still green. They always are down here. My truck was in the driveway. My boat was in the carport. My house, sat solid and quiet behind me, the same way it had for almost half my life. I was 64 years old. I was healthy. My property was protected. My name was clean. And my workshop smelled like walnut shavings and linseed oil, which is my favorite smell in the world. I went back to work. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching,